Butter, you're the reason why I am my way. You're the reason why I rip my shirts, why I eat at the buffet. Butter, you got your very own kind of nice. We all live inside a butter world. Oh, butter, butter, gonna eat it by the stick tonight. Gonna eat out this world. Oh, butter, I'm about to take a bite, 'cause I want that salty cream. What I dream about all night. Butter dreaming. I'm about to take a bite, 'cause I want that salty cream. What I dream about all.
Butter Dreaming. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to a study club number 3 with ButterFueled. We have a great guest, or actually, we are joined by Mr. Anderson, the owner of ButterFueled.
Yeah, what's going on, people? What's going on, Jay? How's everything over there?
Pretty good, pretty good. Just another chilly day here in New England, Massachusetts.
Beautiful, beautiful. Sending warm regards.
Thank
I
you.
will be there shortly.
Yeah, yeah. What's the big arrival date? When is the big arrival date?
Wednesday.
Wednesday?
Next Wednesday. Yeah,
Next
March
Wednesday?
15th. Yeah,
Wow, coming up.
that's right. Going back to the cold. Just in time for spring, though. So
Yeah, just in time for the start of spring. I don't know when the official spring day is. Is it on the equinox?
Or yes.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's nature's
Mar-
calendar.
Nature's calendar, right?
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Nature's calendar. Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
on Study Club today, we have a great paper we want to share with you. It's one of the best papers you're going to see, talking about saturated fats. I'm actually going to put it on the screen.
Yeah, our favorite kind of studies, and just as a reminder, we're doing the study club, right? The point of the study club is to just sit down and kind of just go through papers that are relevant to this way of eating and see if we can learn anything from them, right? In the past,
Yeah.
we covered what did we cover, Jay? We covered a paper on the saturated fat, unsaturated oil dilemma. And then we also covered how to give a woman a heart attack. It was a study that was reviewing the Women's Health Initiative study, was it? They were looking at, was it like over 50 biomarkers?
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, really important papers, when people try to scare you about LDL cholesterol, your whole life improved on carnivore or a keto diet, but then your LDL went up, that's kind of the point. What does the literature actually say? And, of course, this is the literature that most doctors have not bothered to sit down and review. Instead, they're just perpetuating opinions of the health agencies. So, again, just the expectation of the study club, they do get technical, but it's to improve our ability of understanding the literature and having you along for the ride so we can build a stronger foundational base.
Exactly. We live in a current world that requires a lot of logic to fight these lies, and a lot, people like to draw up science, so that's what we gotta do. We gotta use science to fight back. And that's
Exactly,
what the study
yeah.
club is.
Just because they haven't bothered to sit down and read the science doesn't mean it's not out there. So that's what we intend to do through the study club. So we hope to have you
Yes.
along for the journey.
Yes, it is. It is a long one, so hang in tight.
Oh yeah, yeah.
To start us off, it's from the Journal of American College of Cardiology, state-of-the-art review.
My
Right,
favorite
so-
kind of review.
It is the favorite kind of review for Mr. Anderson. He doesn't read anything less than a state-of-the-art papers.
No, we have high standards here. So-called
Exactly.
self-labeled.
So, title of the study: Saturated Fats and Health. a reassessment and proposal for food-based recommendations.
Very straightforward. Jay, you want to make the display screen the bigger one, where we're like on top of it? Yeah, like that.
Like this? Like this?
Yeah, yeah. Stick to that, so people
Alright.
can see better.
Yeah. Yeah, probably give it a closer zoom. Not that much.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's good.
All right. Starting off with the abstract. The abstract will put it up nice and neatly for us. The recommendation to limit dietary saturated fatty acid intake has persisted despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Most recent meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials and observational studies found no beneficial effects of reducing SFA intake on cardiovascular disease, CVD, and total mortality, and instead found protective effects against stroke. Although SFAs increase low density lipoprotein LDL cholesterol in most individuals, this is not due to increasing levels of small dense LDL particles, but rather large LDL particles. So this is actually one of the points that we covered on how to give a woman a heart attack. Um, you see an increase in LDL, but it's not an increase on small dense LDL. It's an increase on large LDL, which is much less strongly correlated to CVD risk. In the how to give a woman a heart attack episode, study club episode, is actually neutral. Large LDL particles seems neutral to CVD. It is also apparent that the health effects of foods cannot be predicted by their content in any nutrient group without considering the overall macronutrient distribution. Whole fat dairy, unprocessed meat, dark chocolate are SFA rich foods with complex matrix that are not associated with increased risk of CVD. The totality of available evidence does not support further limiting the intake of such foods. There you have it.
There you have it. Pretty straightforward. You know, meat and dairy foods are not to blame. Of course, this paper has to make the case for it because seems to be the conventional standard view that needs to be challenged. Even though for most of the history of humanity, these were the foods we were eating. So if anything, the burden of proof should be on these other people. But you know, they've done their things, they've done their techniques, sneaky ways to prove it through the science. And sneak it upon people. But, you know, in short, there's limiting evidence to support the reduction of saturated fatty acids.
Yeah. Pretty much.
All
We're going
right.
to dive into the details.
Yeah, so a bit on the introduction, you know, very important stuff to cover. Lowering the consumption of saturated fat has been a central theme for the U.S. dietary goals, of course, U.S. dietary guidelines, and recommendations since the late 1970s. Since 1980, it has been recommended that saturated fatty acid intake be limited to less than 10% of total calories as a means of reducing risk for cardiovascular disease. In 2018, the U.S. Departments of Agriculture and Health and Human Services asked for public comments in response to the following question: what is the relationship between saturated fat consumption, types and amounts, and risk of CVD in adults? This review aims to address this important question by examining available evidence on the effects of saturated fats on health outcomes, risk factors, and potential mechanisms underlying cardiovascular and metabolic outcomes, which will have implications for the 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans, right? So when we're asking ourselves, why does this matter? It matters because the government will make guidelines, dietary guidelines, for people to adhere to, right? And then, you know, oh, but no one actually follows the government dietary guidelines. Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, they play a direct role on what nutritionists are taught in school, and also what public institutions from, public schools, nursing homes, healthcare facilities, so hospitals, the military, things like that, elderly homes, nursing homes, things like that will use these guidelines for their meals. So if anything, it actually affects the most vulnerable people of us, middle-aged people, like young adults to middle-aged people. You know, we make our own decisions, so it doesn't really affect us. But, you know, the point is, it matters, right? So, continuing on,
Yeah.
the paper goes on to say, the relationship has been studied in about 400,000 people. Some meta-analyses find no evidence that reduction in saturated fat consumption may reduce CVD incidence or mortality, whereas others report a significant, albeit mild, beneficial effect. Therefore,
Interesting.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Therefore, the basis for consistently recommending a diet low in saturated fat is unclear. The purpose of this review is to critically evaluate the health effects of dietary SFAs and to propose an evidence-based recommendation for a healthy intake of SFA food sources. So there you have it. It's been studied in over 400,000 people, and no evidence that reducing the consumption may reduce cardiovascular disease or mortality for that effect. 400,000 people. Seems pretty big.
Yeah. Pretty significant, I would say.
Yeah. And then a little bit about what are saturated fatty acids, right? In case people want to know.
Yeah. I think this is pretty cool to cover.
Yeah.
So SFAs differ on the basis of their carbon chain length and are categorized as short chain fatty acids, short chain, 4 to 6 carbon atoms, medium chain, 8 to 12 carbon atoms, and long chain, 14 to 20, and very long chain, 22 or more. Although these definitions are not standardized. You'll notice that the melting point increases as the chain increases in length. Those that are greater than 10 carbon atoms are solid at room temperature. The primary food contributors of individual SFAs in the diet also differ by SFA length. For example, major food sources for short-chain fatty acids are dairy fats. That's your milk and cheese.
Butter.
And butter. Whoa. Most importantly, butter. While the medium and long chain SFAs are predominantly found in red meat, dairy fats, and plant oils. Interesting. Jumping ahead a little bit, SFAs are also classified on the basis of the presence or absence of methyl branches on carbo chain. Okay, cool. For example, fatty acids with no methyl branch are classified as straight chain fatty acids, while those with one or more methyl branches are termed branch chain fatty acids. Remember those BCAAs, branch chain amino acids? Well, there's branch chain fatty acids.
That's right.
Branch chain saturated fatty acids are found primarily in dairy, beef, and other ruminant-derived foods. Scrolling down. Foods. Right, so I thought that was pretty cool. A breakdown of short, medium, long, and very long chain saturated fatty acids, all saturated. It's just how long the carbon chain is.
Yeah, not all saturated fats are equal, and they're not all straight. Some of them are bent.
Yeah. Yes. It's you like this sort of chemistry, right, Anderson? You're a chemical engineer.
Yes, this makes perfect sense.
Love it. Here, just going to quickly cover the highlights. U.S. dietary guidelines recommend restricting SFA to less than 10%.
Nonsense.
Absolute nonsense. Different SFAs have different biologic effects, which are further modified by the food matrix and carbohydrate content of a diet. Several foods relatively rich in SFA, such as whole fat, dairy, dark chocolate, and unprocessed meat, are not associated with increased CVD or diabetes risk. And there is no robust evidence that current population-wide arbitrary upper limits on saturated fat consumption in the U.S. will prevent CVD or reduce mortality.
Fantastic. And as we continue through the paper, we're just going to be reiterating these points, right? So you can stop here if you want to. But if you want to dive deeper, then stay along for the ride, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So those were the highlights. Going back to the different physical properties of the molecular compounds themselves, right? We're talking about the branch chain fatty acids. The paper describes that they have similar physical chemical properties as unsaturated fatty acids, particularly in the lower melting point, right? Some animal studies show that the branch chain fatty acids alter the microbiota um, and
Yeah.
they're usually normal constituents of healthy human infant gut. These fatty acids could play a role in normal colonization, which makes sense if you find them present in dairy in foods like dairy, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this
now,
reminds me to that the paper that we covered about our last study club about mother's milk, breast milk, always producing saturated fat, no matter
yeah,
the mother's diet,
yeah,
right? So, and here we are seeing, oh, this saturated fat is very important for the gut microbiome.
exactly.
It's all connected.
It's
It's
all
you know,
connected. Yeah, it's the
nature.
preferred fat by humans.
Yeah, nature knows what it's doing, right? It's not giving you, it's not giving the baby heart disease.
Exactly, exactly. The paper then goes on to differentiate between exogenous and endogenous fatty acids. So, like for example, the circulating ones you'll find in like your blood serum. You'll find saturated fatty acids such as myristic, palmitic, and stearic acid, which are influenced by dietary intakes, right? They're exogenous sources. By the way, the fatty acid profile of the mother's milk was mostly palmitic acid.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it says still they are endogenously synthesized via de novo lipogenesis, a process whereby excess carbohydrate and protein are converted to fatty acids, right? So what they're saying is, you'll find these fatty acids in our blood, but then our body will also make them, as a means of storing energy when you overconsume foods, whether that be from protein or carbohydrates, or of course fats. That's why we gain fat and we don't like start gaining like starch. We don't accumulate starch in our wastes. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Evidence from large observational studies indicate different associations for SFAs of varying physical, chemical, and metabolic structures, thereby supporting divergent effects of different SFAs on blood lipids, glucose, insulin, homeostasis, insulin resistance, and diabetes. So basically just saying not all SFAs are created equal. They don't all have the same effect in the human body. So it's important to really get to the bottom of this. What is actually going on? We can't just put all saturated fatty acids in one bucket.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, yeah, a little bit further description about saturated fats. They can be defined as foods that are primarily lipids. Examples include butter and butterfat, dairy-derived fats containing cheese, animal fats such as tallow and lard, and plant oils such as cocoa butter, coconut oil, palm and palm kernel oils. You know, so these are examples of very saturated fats. Fats that are high in saturated fatty acids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see what else. The majority of SFAs in most natural human diets are going to be stearic, palmitic, myristic, lauric acid with linear chains of 18, 16, 14, and 12 carbon atoms, respectively. Okay, so all of that was just a little bit of background on, a little bit of the chemical background on the saturated fatty acids, right? So different sizes, probably going to have different effects on the human body. They're found in different compositions from different fat sources. So all things considered. There's a nice table there that shows.
Oh yeah, the table is good.
Yeah, so if you start with the shortest one, four carbon atoms in the chain, butyric acid, its ketone form being butyrate. It's butyric acid or butyrate are what fiber is touted to be beneficial for, because it feeds the colon cells, it feeds your gut bacteria, feeds your gut, right? So what is the richest dietary source of butyric acid? It's dairy. It's not actually fiber. With fiber, your gut microbiome actually has to do the conversion from carbohydrates to butyric acid. So just circumvent the whole process. Eat some dairy. It's going to support your digestion, so long as you're not lactose intolerant, right? In which case, maybe
Yeah.
some raw dairy might be the solution for you, or or maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like this table, right? Because it shows you all the carbon chains, you know, number of carbons and the names and, short, medium, long, and the food sources. And there's a lot of overlap. Um, Dairy foods have a bunch of them. Red meat appears in a bunch of them too. Um, Palm oil appears here too under palmitic
Yeah.
and caprylic. So that's interesting to know too. Evidence on the health effects of saturated fat. In the 1950s, with the increase in coronary heart disease in Western countries, research on nutrition and health focused on a range of diet heart hypotheses. This included the putative harmful effects of dietary fats, particularly saturated fat, and the lower risk associated with the Mediterranean diet to explain why individuals in the United States, Northern Europe, and the UK were more prone to CHD. So, yeah, this, is talking about the diet heart hypothesis. Saturated fat is associated with increased heart disease. That's the diet heart hypothesis. This idea came from the 7-country study by Ansel Keys. You probably know by Ansel Keys by now, but that's the guy that made this study, and the diet heart hypothesis was born from it. For example, the very high intake of saturated fat in Finland has decreased considerably, with per capita butter consumption decreasing from 16 kilograms per year in 1955 to 3 kilograms per year in 2005, and the percent energy from saturated fat decreasing from 20% in 1882 to 12% in 2007. Therefore, the dietary guidelines that are developed based on this information from several decades ago may no longer be applicable.
Interesting. Yeah, I bet they had a lot. I suppose they had a lot more heart disease. They have a lot more heart disease now than before. 16 kilograms of butter per year, man.
Wow.
That's like 30 pounds of butter. That's
Yummy.
like a bit over 30 pounds. So that's about just what, about a pound. Man, that's like 4 sticks of butter in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's a lot of butter.
That's a lot of butter. You're basically consuming two sticks of butters per week, right? Something like that.
Per capita, man.
Wow,
Amazing.
per person. Wow, that's a lot of butter, man. It's like we have amnesia now. We forgot how good these foods are.
Yeah.
A few large and well-designed prospective cohort studies were used to validate questionnaires to assess diet and recorded endpoints in a systematic manner were initiated recently. They demonstrate that the replacement of fat with carbohydrate was not associated with lower risk of CHD and may be even associated with an increased total mortality. Furthermore, a number of systematic reviews of cohort studies have shown no significant association between saturated fat intake and coronary artery disease or mortality, and some even suggested a lower risk of stroke with a higher consumption of saturated fat. Lower risk of stroke. That's very neat.
Yeah. So not only has it shown no significant association, but some even show a protective effect. Well, there you go.
Yeah. This is completely opposite to what is commonly held belief.
Exactly.
It's just a belief.
Yeah, but of course, if you follow a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, then this is the belief that, well, this is the truth that we live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get healthier, when you get healthier, you're not giving yourself heart disease.
Yeah. Yeah, it is something that a lot of people wrestle with when entering the keto diet or high-fat diets or carnivore. It's like, I'm getting healthy, but am I actually dying at the same time? So people look out for answers because it doesn't make sense. Something in them tells them this does not make sense. And here we go. This is the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the truth. Data from Fatty Acids and Outcome Research Consortium, consisting of 15 prospective cohorts worldwide, 33,000 adults who were free of CBD, demonstrated that biomarkers of very long-chain SFA 20, 22, 24 were not associated with total CHD, And if anything, levels in plasma or serum may be inversely associated with CHD. Interesting.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense with what we've explained before with when we talked about seed oils. You know, saturated fatty acids are more chemically stable. When the fatty acids like polyunsaturated ones are chemically unstable, they're more likely to oxidize and come and cause all sorts of damage, oxidative damage in your cells, right? In your arteries, etc., etc.
Yeah. Uh, in a large and most recent diverse study addressing these questions, the pure prospective urban rural epidemiological study, in 135,000 people, mostly without CBD from 18 countries on 5 continents, 80% low and middle income countries, increased consumption of all types of fat, saturated, mono, and poly, was associated with lower risk of death and had a neutral association with CBD. By contrast, a diet high in carbohydrate was associated with higher risk of death, but not risk of CBD. So, I mean, yeah, just yeah, here they are citing another study from pure perspective, urban rural epidemiological study. These people increased all their fat intake, and there was lower risk of death, neutral association to CBD, and the people who were consuming carbohydrates had a higher risk of death, but not risk of CBD. That's what this study found.
Mm-hmm.
The study also demonstrated that individuals in the quintile with the highest saturated fat intake, about 14% of total daily calories, had lower risk of stroke, consistent with the results from meta-analysis of previous cohort studies. Again, so this is another study confirming that, higher saturated fat intake was associated with lower risk of stroke.
Yeah, suggesting it even has a protective effect.
Yeah. So I would say pretty important. In a different study, 96,000 participants from the UK Biobank were followed up for 10.6 years. There was no evidence that saturated fat intake was associated with the incident CVD. In contrast, the substitution of polyunsaturated for saturated fat was associated with higher CVD risk. So swapping out saturated fat for the polyunsaturated fat was associated with higher CVD risk. That was found in this study, although this is not a consistent finding across many studies. Although there was a positive relation of saturated fat intake with all-cause mortality, this became significant only with intakes well above average consumption. Again, these people were not carnivores, and they were probably just following some, regular diet, and they just analyzed for saturated fat consumption, I would presume. All right. For dietary carbohydrate, higher consumption was associated with higher risk of CVD and mortality. In the context of contemporary diets, therefore, these observations would suggest that there is little need to further limit intakes of total or saturated fat for most population. By contrast, restricting carbohydrate intake, particularly refined carbohydrates, may be more relevant today for decreasing the risk of mortality in some individuals.
There you go. Nothing too surprising.
Nothing too surprising, yeah. Refined carbohydrates. Let's start looking at that. Let's start actually putting a limit on that instead of saturated fat. Let me see. So yeah, here the authors continue to cite more studies. They cite the Women's Health Initiative study, where they showed that the risk for heart attack and stroke was unaffected after 8 years on a low-fat diet, in which saturated fat provided 9.5% of daily energy intake. So despite being low-fat diet, 10% of that low-fat energy was saturated fat. So this is highlighting that there is a limit on that less than 10% fat. And it seems like it supports the idea that it protects you from stroke. This other study from Pre-Dimed, a prevención con dieta mediterránea, prevention with a Mediterranean diet, compared a low-fat diet with a Mediterranean diet with nuts and olive oil. What they found is that major cardiovascular events and death were significantly reduced compared with the control group. So the group that had that nuts and the olive oil had fewer deaths relevant to cardiovascular events. Here they mentioned 6 systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And the results from this showed that replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat had no significant effect on coronary outcomes, the primary outcome of these trials, or on total mortality. So there's this inconsistency, right, between polyunsaturated fat and it causing a coronary event. Sometimes it shows like it does. Sometimes it seems like it's no significant effect. In this particular case, doesn't matter if you swap out saturated for poly or poly for saturated, there's no significant event on coronary outcomes. An important possibility to consider is that an apparently lower risk of CVD with substitution of SFAs by polyunsaturated fatty acids could be attributed to a possible beneficial effect of polyunsaturated fatty acids and not necessarily to an adverse effect of SFAs. Basically saying that SFAs are neutral or potentially beneficial, but when people see that there's lower risk for CVD because of polyunsaturated fats, it may be because the polyunsaturated fats may have a beneficial effect, not because saturated fats are negative.
Exactly, and in this part, the authors are just trying to play the other side, right? So they're considering the opposing evidence. This is the opposing evidence. What this paragraph just went over, Mediterranean diet is going to be higher in monounsaturated, and then they're saying there might be some benefits of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which, as we know, could be the lowering of LDL. If you want to claim that can be beneficial, of course. They explain it away, but anyhow.
Yeah. So let me see. Yeah, I'll just read this part too, and then you can take over. Just finish this column. There is therefore a large body of information that raises questions regarding conventional beliefs about SFAs and clinical outcomes. Taken together, the evidence from both cohort studies and randomized trials does not support the assertion that further restriction of dietary saturated fat will reduce clinical events.
I like that they said conventional beliefs.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that section, the paper that you just covered, the paper went over some of the evidence that we have available on saturated fat. This next section is about moving on to some of the minor details: low density lipoprotein cholesterol and other biomarkers for assessing the effects of dietary saturated fat on cardiovascular risk. So, of course, as we know, LDL has been scapegoated for a long time. But there are weaknesses in the argument that a reduction in CVD risk with saturated fat restriction can be inferred from the capacity of saturated fatty acids to increase your LDL cholesterol when substituted for carbs or unsaturated fatty acids, right? So the belief, I believe in my view, it's a belief that saturated fatty acids raise your LDL cholesterol, but rather, we talked about this in the previous study club too, but rather, it's the unsaturated, it's the plant oils that actually decrease your LDL cholesterol. And you can make the case that should you just consume animal fats, then that is supposed to be your baseline cholesterol, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just a matter of starting point, and it's a matter of like, what you're considering your starting point, relatively speaking. But anyways, first,
Yeah.
although it's evident that LDL particles play a causal role in the development of CVD, and that in general there is a relationship between lowering LDL cholesterol and CVD benefit, a diet-induced reduction of LDL cholesterol cannot be inferred to result in CVD benefit without having the means for a comprehensive assessment of other biologic effects that may accompany this reduction. In this regard, it is notable that postmenopausal estrogen plus progestin therapy and treatment with several cholesterol ester transport protein inhibitors result in no CVD benefit despite substantial LDL cholesterol lowering. In contrast, Mediterranean-style dietary interventions reduce CVD risk without significantly reducing LDL cholesterol. Moreover, inhibition of sodium glucose cotransporter type 2 reduces CVD events despite an increase in LDL cholesterol levels. So, in other words, that was quite a mouthful, but what they're saying here is it's not always clear that lowering your LDL cholesterol results in a CVD benefit. There are some cases where there is no CVD benefit despite lowering LDL. There are some cases where there is a CVD benefit without reducing LDL, and you get the gist. Basically, you get to see all of it, right? Even with the Mediterranean diet, it doesn't necessarily lower LDL cholesterol, but it promotes a benefit, right?
Yeah.
So the point is there's conflicting evidence that it's just as simple as lower LDL, you'll be protected. And as a matter of fact, we've shown multiple times on our page that in most cases of CVD, of cardiovascular disease, it happens in people with actually low cholesterol numbers, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
and of course higher cholesterol levels are associated with longevity in the elderly, and in short, right? And then you can get into the whole statin therapy thing, but that's not what this is about. But a second reason is not that simple. You can just scapegoat LDL. Lowering LDL cholesterol concentration primarily reflects reduced levels of large LDL particle subspecies, right? So large LDLs are more cholesterol enriched, but have much weaker associations with CVD risk than do smaller LDL particles, which are not reduced by saturated fat restriction in the majority of individuals. Moreover, decreasing saturated fat intake also lowers the levels of high-density lipoprotein, HDL cholesterol, and hence has a relatively small effect on the ratio of total to HDL cholesterol, which is a robust marker of CVD risk. Okay, so in other words, what they're saying here is if you remove the saturated fat, that does not necessarily, and you lower your LDL cholesterol, that is lowering the number of your large LDL particles. But the small, dense LDL particles will still be around even if you lower your LDL, your total LDL count. And furthermore, if you reduce your saturated fat intake, you're going to be reducing your HDL numbers, which HDL is supposed to be, it's colloquially known as the good cholesterol, but now you're messing with the ratio, right? And which is a better marker than just looking at LDL alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So, yeah. Yeah, and that's an excellent point where yeah, you're lowering your LDL by consuming less saturated fat, but you're also lowering your HDL, therefore reducing your ratio of total HDL to cholesterol, which is a really strong marker for CVD risk. So it's a wash, right?
pretty much, right? Yeah, because you're still gonna have around the small dense LDL, which is the problematic one, right? So
Yeah.
if you're still ingesting lots of carbohydrates or polyunsaturated seed oils, then you're decreasing the likelihood of oxidizing the large LDLs, I suppose, but you're still increasing the net risk, I suppose. Does that make sense? You're increasing the concentrations of these oxidative species in your system, but you have fewer victims, right? So if anything, it might just cause damage somewhere else, if not on your LDLs.
Yeah.
That would be complicated to figure out. So moving on, uh, and they referenced the Pure study, which was referenced before. The Pure study reported it that the observed hazard ratio for the association between saturated fat and CVD events does not fit a relation with plasma LDL cholesterol, but rather is related to the ratio of apolipoprotein B, ApoB, to ApoA1, which is a measure related to the atherogenic particle concentration. ApoB is found in LDL and very low density lipoprotein particles, and ApoA1 is found in HDL particles. In fact, this ratio was lower in those with higher saturated fat intake. For these reasons, dietary effects on cardiovascular disease risk may not be reliably reflected by changes in LDL cholesterol levels, and therefore it is imperative to develop and implement more valid surrogate markers for assessing CVD risk and monitoring diet-induced effects in research and clinical practice. Right? So what they're saying is when you look at ApoB, now you're talking about not only LDL, but the very, very low density VLDL particles. So, you kind of grouping these two lipoproteins in one group, and now you're looking at the ratio of those, your ApoB lipoproteins to your HDL, right? So if you consume more saturated fats, you have a better ratio, is what the paper saying that the Pure study said. If you remove them, then your ratios get worse, by virtue of lowering your large LDL particles, but still having the small dense ones around, and your HDL lowering as well. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah.
It only makes sense for those who have actually sat down and looked at the cholesterol numbers and understand why LDL alone is not a good indicator, right? Unlike what the nutrition nerds keep pushing with their Mendelian randomization trials, which, it's just further shuffling and just, the more confusing they make it, the less likely it is to be true. This is pretty straightforward.
That's a good way to put it. The more confusing they make it, the less likely it is to be true.
Yeah.
Modulation of health effects of saturated fat by dietary carbohydrate intake and insulin resistance. All right, so now we're going to talk about carbs and insulin resistance.
Yeah.
For example, insulin resistance in lean subjects demonstrated impaired skeletal muscle glucose oxidation, increased hepatic de novo lipogenesis, that means your liver creating fat, and atherogenic dyslipidemia after a high carbohydrate meal. Right, so kind of highlighting that if you're insulin resistant, you have a hard time metabolizing glucose. Your liver's going to produce fatty acids, and you're going to have atherogenic dyslipidemia after you eat a high carbohydrate meal. Therefore, individuals with insulin resistance have a higher propensity to convert carbohydrate to fat. So that seems to be the problem, not consuming the fat, but converting the carb to fat. And this will further exacerbate the insulin-resistant phenotype. In addition to the standard risk factors like high triglycerides and low HDL cholesterol concentrations, increased central adiposity, hypertension, hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, this phenotype also includes circulating levels of SFAs and lipogenic fatty acids, such as palmitoleic acid, C16-1. Basically being insulin resistance, you will also show high, your standard risk factors will also show high trigs, high glycemia, hyperglycemia, insulinemia, a lot of fat, central adiposity. All right. Now, it is important to distinguish between saturated fat and circulating saturated fatty acids, SFAs. Individuals with higher circulating levels of even chain SFAs have increased risk of developing metabolic syndrome, diabetes, CVD, heart failure, and mortality. Notably, the amount of circulating SFAs in blood is not related to saturated fat intake from the diet, but instead tends to track more closely with dietary carbohydrate intake. For example, an increase in saturated fat consumption by 2 to 3-fold either has no effect or decreases serum levels of SFAs in the context of a lower carbohydrate intake. So, yeah, I'm just going to quickly highlight the point made here is that you can see higher levels of SFAs of these very specific, even chain SFAs like palmitate, C16, and you see more of those circulating in the blood. But these do not come from the saturated fat consumption. They come from, likely, from the hepatic de novo lipogenesis, your liver turning that carbohydrate into fat. A decreased accumulation of circulating SFAs in response to diets to lower in carbohydrate and higher in saturated fat is partially mediated by lower production through the de novo lipogenesis, but also increased clearance. Right. So basically, by the mere fact going low carb, you actually become a fat burner. And now because you're a fat burner, you're actually not producing fat from your liver because you are eating the fat. So your liver is not producing that fat. And because now you're a fat burner, you're actually burning mostly fat for energy. So, there is a decreasing accumulation of SFAs because of this change in diet. Thus, combination of greater fat oxidation and attenuation of hepatic lipogenesis could explain why a higher dietary saturated fat intake is associated with lower circulating SFAs in the context of low carbohydrate intake. Although palmitic acid is a primary fatty acid product of de novo lipogenesis, a product of steryl-CoA desaturase activity, is a better proxy of lipogenesis because of its low content in the diet and the fact that it increases proportionally more than any other fatty acid where carbohydrate is converted to fat.
So hold on. So they're talking about palmitoleic acid there.
Yeah. Serum palmitoleic acid, C16, 1 and 7.
Yeah, which is different from palmitic acid. What they're saying, it's a better proxy, and palmitoleic is the one that is most associated with carb conversion.
Yeah. Carb conversion. Several studies support a close link between increased dietary carbohydrate intake and increased palmitoleic acid levels, an effect that is independent of changes in body weight and saturated fat intake. So basically saying that, your weight is not changing, but just by the mere fact that of you changing your macronutrients from carb to more fat, your SFA levels change. And you have this palmitoleic higher because you're consuming more carbs. And the reason that is problematic, because we just covered that, this seems that the carb conversion seems to be not ideal for CVD risk. Palmitoleic acid levels in blood and adipose tissue are consistently and strongly linked to obesity and hypertriglyceridemia, hyperglycemia and type 2 diabetes, heart failure, and CVD mortality. Furthermore, in non-diabetic men, higher proportions of palmitoleic acid in erythrocyte membranes were significantly associated with worsening of hyperglycemia and development of metabolic syndrome. So I kind of jumped ahead on this point, but palmitoleic acid, if it's found higher, there seems to be a higher association to, or more stronger link to, worsening hyperglycemia, worsening metabolic syndrome, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, blood glucose control. Kind of repeated myself there, but you get it.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think this is going to be like something new that most people have never heard. right? That, we're talking about all the different saturated fatty acids, and now we're talking about one in particular that seems to be mostly associated with all these metabolic conditions, right? Unhealthy conditions, if you will. And it's this,
Hmm.
palmitoleic acid. And it seems to be originated from the carb conversion by the liver. Oh, pretty interesting stuff,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, this is incredibly insightful. I like it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just here the authors are further providing more supporting evidence about the palmitoleic acid. Higher palmitoleic acid, 67% greater risk of incident heart failure, 52% greater risk of incident is ischemic stroke compared to the lowest quantile. Increased plasma levels of palmitoleic acid concentration associated with 19% greater odds ratio for coronary artery disease, 17% greater odds of congestive heart failure. So they're providing a lot of support towards the idea that palmitoleic acid not good.
Yeah.
To boil it down very simply. Uh, Clearly, the impact of dietary SFAs on health must consider the important role of carbohydrate intake and the underlying degree of insulin resistance. So, what would Ray Peters have to say about this? We like the carb conversion good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, it's pretty alarming, pretty clear. Oh, I think we've got a comment.
Jason, this is super interesting. Thank you guys for doing this. Thank you for tuning in. It's important to bring these types of studies to light. There's pretty good research out there. We have a whole spreadsheet of a bunch of stuff, but obviously it's not something that everyone's spending time reading, right? People kind of just go by the citation or the headlines or whatever.
Dude,
And
people don't even cite things online. Like, online is it's an echo chamber of just like, who can regurgitate most talking points.
yeah, who can follow the talking points best?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Who's like the best soldier who subscribes to all the point of view, Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
this is pretty fascinating. I mean, I definitely learned something today, and we're almost at the top of the hour, Jay. So
Oh yeah.
I think we covered most of what you actually wanted to cover, because then they start talking about genes, and once they start talking about genes, I think we're opening up a can of worms. In my view, we're all human, so there is such a thing as, we all share the same physiology in terms of our gut and like digestive tract. So clearly, we're all geared to be optimally deriving nutrition from animal foods. And that's not to say plant foods are evil either, but clearly humans are meant to eat meat, and animal fat is not bad for us. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And yes, because we do want to keep it under an hour. Right. So yeah, just the overall head effects of fat and oil depends on the content of the phase. Yeah. So we can, you know, yeah, you're right. A lot of talk about genes. Uh, let's see.
yeah, and then they talk about how in the literature, in the science, it's better if we stop looking at foods for foods that are if we stop looking at foods no sorry if we stop looking at the fats based on their whether saturated fat is bad, or polyunsaturated fat is better. What they're saying is we can't make those uh, we can't make those claims. Those beliefs, they don't stand in reality. But rather we should focus on whole foods, right? And look at the whole food matrix, right? uh, whole fat dairy, unprocessed red meat, and dark chocolate. They're all foods high in saturated fats. They're not exclusively saturated fats, mind you. Red meat is like 50% unsaturated, saturated, and monounsaturated. the very, very small, like under 5% polyunsaturated. Whole fat dairy, has a very different saturated fat profile, being mostly short chain fatty acids, unlike meat and the chocolate, which are longer chain. So, there's all those things to consider. Like, it's not just that straightforward. Because, it used to be the belief that, saturated fats, they're solid at room temperature. So when you eat them, they probably clog your arteries like like grease in a pipe, in a cold pipe, right? If you're trying to pour bacon fat down your drain, it's probably going to get clogged, right? And that was sort of the analogies that were perpetuated by people in the AHA and Ansel Keys, that sort of a thing. But within this state-of-the-art review, they mentioned, if you, in the section where they go over the evidence, there's conflicting evidence all across the board, and these are big studies. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. It's not that obvious that reducing saturated fat intake leads to any benefit, and in some cases it even seems to be protective.
Yeah.
So in animal fats we trust. That's our slogan.
Yeah. And here, just to cover the last section of it, health effects of differing food sources of saturated fatty acids. It's basically showing like the diagram that we were just showing above, but yogurt and cheese. Food-based meta-analysis consistently find that cheese and yogurt intakes are inversely associated with CVD risk, right? And these are, as you saw, primary sources of saturated fatty acids. However, they are inversely associated with CVD. Here, jumping to dark chocolate, which I thought it was interesting, right? We always talk about animal fats and everything animal-based coming from an animal. But they decided to talk about dark chocolate because it contains stearic acid C18-0 and has a neutral effect on CVD risk. So I guess if you like your dark chocolate, right? It's no sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
No sugar, because the moment you have sugar in it, now you're going through the carb conversion process of carb into fat, and your liver is involved more.
Exactly.
So at least neutral, and they're saying here that dark chocolate has multiple beneficial health effects, including potential antioxidative, antihypertensive, anti-inflammatory, anti-atherogenic. So that means heart clogging, and antithrombotic properties. So thrombotic, I want to say, is like arthritis, right?
Yes.
I think, yeah. And then meat. Although intake of processed meat has been associated with increase of CHT, intake of unprocessed red meat is not, which indicates that the SFA content of meat is unlikely to be responsible for this association. And you always hear about this, processed meat versus unprocessed red meat. They're both bad for you or whatever, but it seems that it's the potentially processed red meat, but definitely not unprocessed red meat. Unprocessed red meat, that includes ground beef, right? It goes through a grinder, but people think that's processed. No.
Yeah, when they say processed meat, they're talking more like hot dogs and bacon. Which, in my view, I don't even think like processed meat is necessarily bad. I think it's largely confounded by lots of behavioral aspects. If you're eating hot dogs, you're probably having it in a bun with ketchup, which is just high fructose corn syrup, probably having a soda or some beer, you're probably at a tailgate, so on and so forth. But I would even make the case, but of course the data does seem to suggest that processed meat is less healthy.
Oh, yeah. The meta-analysis found the processed meat gave rise to 19% higher risk of type 2 diabetes, but red meat consumption was not significantly associated. So yeah, that's a whole another topic, like trying to dive into what how processed meat came to be the bad guy.
Yeah. In any case, we're always advocating for like whole foods, right?
Yeah.
Should the situation call for it, maybe go for the hot dog, but I wouldn't either. I wouldn't really say, that is the way. Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, want to read the last sections?
And yeah, the last section, just to, you know, try to be as unbiased as possible. The authors included this paragraph saying that there was one analysis that found a small but significant association of processed meat, unprocessed red meats, and poultry consumption with higher risk of incident CVD, and a mild association of processed or unprocessed red meat with higher risk of all-cause mortality. Um, so, out of all the entire research that they did, they found this one study, which would be pretty cool to find out, what's going on here. But nevertheless, meat is a major source of protein, bioavailable iron, minerals, vitamins in modest amounts. Unprocessed red meat constitutes an important part of the diet for the elderly and low-income populations in many developing countries. It's a food that's accessible for everyone.
Yeah, you can grow it all around the world.
Yes, you can grow it all around the world.
Yeah, and then just for the conclusion, long-standing bias foods against foods rich in saturated fat should be replaced with a view towards recommending diets consisting of healthy foods. What steps could shift the bias? So they suggest four steps. One, enhance the public understanding that many foods, for example, whole fat dairy, play an important role in meeting dietary and nutritional recommendations, may also be in saturated fats. Number two, make the public aware that low carbohydrate diets high in saturated fat, which are popular for managing body weight, may also improve metabolic disease endpoints in some individuals, but emphasize that health effects of dietary carbohydrate, just like those of saturated fat, depend on the amount, type, and quality of carbohydrate, food sources, degree of processing, etc. Number three, shift focus from the current paradigm that emphasizes that saturated fat content of foods as key for health to one that centers on specific traditional foods, so that nutritionists, dietitians, and the public can easily identify healthful sources of saturated fats. And number four, encourage committees in charge of making macronutrient-based recommendations to translate those recommendations into appropriate, culturally sensitive dietary patterns tailored to different populations. So a lot of wishful thinking in short. Encourage the committees, make these recommendations, educate the public that there's a lot of nutrition to be found in foods that are rich in saturated fat, like whole fat dairy and, of course, red meat, and animal fats for that matter. But,
Mhm.
We'll leave it to the experts for them to, come up with the guidelines, which, at the end is going to be the government guidelines. And if you really look at who's making the latest 2024 dietary guidelines advisory committee, you have people like Dr. Stanford, who has long been an advocate for obesity medication, of course, like GLP-1 agonists and other things. People who push for balance and who will subscribe to food compasses like those of Tufts University that are largely funded by General Mills, advocating for heart-healthy Cheerios instead of ground beef and eggs and cheese. So, these experts, they're purposefully confusing you. The nutrition nerds, they'll tell you, oh, you never adhered to the guidelines. But the guidelines are trash. And I don't think we have to sit on our hands and wait for that to happen. It's really more simple than people want to make it to be.
Yeah.
Eat animals.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Eat animals. It all boils down to eat animals. We're doing all this hoo-ha, fanfare, jumping up and down, doing all the research. It comes down to just eat animals, man.
Yeah. And, and reduce your carbohydrate intake, I think keep it under 100 grams from anywhere from 0 to 100, probably going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
I would say that. Yeah.
Yeah, from 0 to 100. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm
So
okay with
that's
that
low carb,
recommendation.
scientifically speaking, that's low carb. So,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
if you want to learn how to build a low carb animal based diet, we just covered that on our previous Monday Night Live yesterday. That was episode number 13, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jay? So go
Episode
check
number
that out.
13, yes.
We take you through the steps. This is this kind of stuff that we do with our clients. And of course, we're coming up with their nutrition protocols along with their individualized workout programs to maximize, building muscle. Because, yes, it's as simple as far as nutrition goes, eat animals, but also you gotta build some muscle. Cut the junk, build out your trunk. Eat meat, lift weights, sleep deep. It's really that simple. It's not easy, and there are no shortcuts, but that's what this is about.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Anyhow, thanks everyone. Just look, 100 or so, 124 citations in this paper. State of the art review. There you go.
yeah,
Best
from
of the best
2020, from 2020, 3 years ago,
from
and
2020.
look at the 2024 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Tell me if something's changed. Tell me. I challenge you. So,
Yes, yes. Saturated
yeah,
fats and health.
yeah, great paper. Um, Anything else you want to cover, Jay?
No, I think we got it. I think we did what we had to do, and we did it right, and we did it good.
Amazing, amazing. I have some pulled pork I have in the fridge. I'm gonna go heat up
Nice,
for
nice,
dinner tonight. Probably gonna mix it in with some yogurt. I'm
nice.
having animal fats, whole fat dairy, of course. But
Mm.
if you're watching this, please make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bells. Go support us on all of our social medias. Of course, we're on YouTube. We're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Go support us. Go like and share our content. Algo lords don't like us. Support us in dismantling the perverse food agenda and helping humans get strong and healthy. You can go check out our website, buy our merch, support our affiliates, and if you need help losing weight, if you've struggled with crash dieting, lose the weight, you keep rebounding, hit us up for coaching. We do offer individualized 2-on-1 coaching so that you can sustainably keep that fat off forever. We mix concepts of animal-based nutrition together with strength training, bodybuilding, and powerlifting in order to make that a sustainable approach for you. Animal-based nutrition is the way to go.
Yes. Sweet. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate your time, attention, and your support. Look forward to seeing everyone on the next episode. Could be another study club, or it could be Monday Night Live, or it could be at a guest show, having a guest over. You can also hop in on our Wednesday Zoom calls. Come chat with us. We're pretty chill.
Yeah, join our Discord. We'll actually hang out. So,
Yeah. Yes. So, with that said, I wish everyone a happy and healthy and high quality food era for you.
I love it.
Good night.
Peace.
Butter! Gonna eat it.